He walked away silently, but his comeback made headlines. If you're new to my channel, make sure to support by subscribing and turning on the notifications. Your support means everything. All right, let's dive into the story. The night swallowed him whole, just as he had hoped. No footsteps echoed behind him, no voices called his name. It was as if he had never existed, but that was the beauty of it. His disappearance wasn't meant to be noticed. Not yet. While they carried on with their lives, oblivious to the storm he was about to unleash, he was watching, waiting. Every sleepless night, every passing hour, he was piecing together the perfect return, one that wouldn't just announce his presence, but would make them wish he had stayed gone. And her? She had rewritten her story as if he had never been a part of it, erased his name, buried his memories. But the thing about buried ghosts is that they don't rest for long, and when they rise, they don't come back empty-handed. They come back with unfinished business. Time had reduced him to a whisper, an afterthought in conversations that barely lasted a second. They spoke his name like a distant rumor, a story that had faded into irrelevance. But while they moved on, thinking he was nothing more than a ghost of the past, he was preparing for the moment they'd have no choice but to remember. Every sleepless night, every silent sacrifice, every plan he set into motion, it was all leading to one thing, his return. But this wasn't just a return. This was a reckoning, and when the day finally came, he didn't ask for permission. He didn't send warnings. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped into their world unannounced and shattered it beyond repair. She had built her life on the belief that he would never matter, that his dreams were just foolish fantasies destined to collapse. He was the boy she left behind, the man she never thought twice about. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. Now his name was everywhere. Bold headlines, flashing screens, voices, whispering in hushed, urgent tones. Every step she took, every place she turned, there he was, not as the failure she once mocked, but as the man who held all the power. Her breath hitched as she stared at his image on the screen. The confidence in his eyes, the smirk that told 1,000 untold stories. He wasn't here for revenge. No, that would be too easy. He was here to remind her that the person she once stepped on was now the only one who could decide whether she stood or fell. The city hadn't changed. The same towering buildings, the same bustling streets, the same people who once dismissed him without a second thought. But tonight, everything felt different, because tonight he wasn't invisible. He walked through the heart of it all, his presence demanding attention without a single word. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Phones lifted, capturing proof that the whispers were true. He was back, and with his return came the questions, the speculation. Where had he been all these years? How had he come back like this? But the one question that sent a chill through those who had once known him, was he here for redemption or revenge? He didn't owe them answers, not yet. Because the real reason for his return, that was a secret only he knew. And when the time was right, they wouldn't have to ask, they would feel it. She had spent years convincing herself that he was gone forever, that he was nothing more than a forgotten name in a story she had rewritten to her advantage. With him out of the picture, she had everything: prestige, control, a world that bent to her will. But power is a delicate thing. It doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks, slowly, silently. The first crack came when she heard his name in a hushed conversation, the second when she saw the unease in the eyes of those around her, and the third when she realized she was no longer the one being watched. Now every whispered rumor felt like a noose tightening around her neck. Had he come back for her? Did he know the truth? And if he did, what was he waiting for? For the first time in years, she wasn't the one pulling the strings, and that terrified her more than anything. It started as a whisper, a fleeting rumor that no one took seriously until it refused to fade. A name resurfaced in quiet conversations, a familiar figure glimpsed in the corner of a crowded room, gone before anyone could be sure. The people who had once wronged him scoffed at first. It couldn't be him. It had been too long. He had disappeared without a trace. But then things started to shift. Phone calls went unanswered. Businesses that once thrived suddenly found themselves on the edge of collapse. Secrets thought to be buried began clawing their way to the surface, and those who had laughed at the idea of his return, they weren't laughing anymore, because this wasn't just fate bringing him back. This was a carefully orchestrated storm, and the first drops of rain had just begun to fall. The air in the ballroom was thick with laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. She moved through the crowd effortlessly, her smile poised, her presence commanding. This was her world, a world she had built, a world where she was untouchable. Or so she thought. The shift was subtle at first, conversations halting mid-sentence, eyes widening, murmurs spreading like wildfire, and then silence. A silence so sharp it cut through the music. She followed their stares, her pulse quickening, and then she saw him, standing at the far end of the room, calm and collected, like he had never left. He wasn't just present. He owned the space, and the smirk on his lips, it wasn't just confidence. It was a message, a reminder. She had spent years erasing him. Now he was here to remind her. Some ghosts don't stay buried. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to announce his return. His presence alone did what words never could. One by one, the powerful men and women who once dismissed him felt their grip on control slipping. Deals were put on hold. Meetings ended in whispers. Everyone was waiting, watching. What was he planning? But he gave them nothing. No warnings, no accusations. Just a calm, unshaken confidence that unsettled even the most ruthless among them, because the unknown is the most dangerous kind of fear. And as the days passed, that fear grew. Was he here for payback? To reclaim what was his? Or had he come back to destroy everything they had built? No one knew the answer, and that uncertainty was enough to tear them apart from the inside. It didn't happen all at once. It started slow, almost unnoticeable. A rumor slipping through the cracks, a missing file, a name that shouldn't have been on a document to you, but was. At first they dismissed it, coincidence, a small mistake, but then the cracks widened. Bank accounts were flagged, confidential deals exposed, the carefully woven web of power they had built over the years. It was unraveling thread by thread, and the worst part, he never said a word. No threats, no demands, just his presence lingering in the background, watching as they tore themselves apart, desperate to find out how much he knew and what he would do next. She stared at the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the embossed letters. Tonight, no sender, no explanation, just a destination scrawled in sharp, deliberate ink. Her mind raced. No one dared summon her like this. No one except him. For years, she had convinced herself that he was nothing, that his return meant nothing. But now, as she held that black envelope, a cold realization settled in. She was no longer in control. Her instinct screamed at her to ignore it, to pretend she never saw it. But deep down, she knew she had no choice. If she didn't show up, he would make sure she regretted it. The game had begun, and for the first time, she wasn't the one making the rules. She stopped at the entrance, her heels clicking against the marble floor, the only sound in the suffocating silence. The restaurant, usually alive with chatter and clinking glasses, felt frozen in time. Just her. And him. He sat with an effortless confidence, fingers tapping lightly against the rim of his glass. He hadn't changed. If anything, he looked sharper, more in control than ever. But it was his eyes that unnerved her the most. Dark, knowing, unreadable. She forced herself to move forward, each step heavier than the last. As she reached the table, he leaned in slightly, the corner of his lips curling into a smirk. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Her breath hitched, because in a way, she had. The past she thought was dead and buried was sitting right in front of her, and he wasn't here for small talk. She tilted her chin up, masking the unease creeping up her spine. Control the conversation. Control the outcome. That had always been her way. "Should I be surprised?" she asked, her voice smooth, practiced. His chuckle was low, almost amused. He leaned back, studying her like a puzzle he had already solved. "No," he said, swirling the untouched wine in his glass. "You should be worried." A flicker of something sharp twisted in her chest, but she kept her mask in place. He was toying with her, letting silence stretch, letting her mind spiral. She had spent years convincing herself he was gone, that he was nothing more than a forgotten mistake, lost in the past. But now, sitting across from him, with the weight of his gaze pressing down on her, she realized just how badly she had miscalculated. He wasn't a mistake, he was a consequence, and he was here to collect. Her pulse hammered as she unfolded the paper, the crisp edges slicing against her fingertips. The handwriting was unmistakable. His, sharp, precise, deliberate. 4 words stared back at her, sinking like ice into her veins. "I never forgot. Did you?" The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She forced herself to look up, but he was already watching her, his expression unreadable. Not angry, not vengeful, just patient, like a man who had all the time in the world to watch her crumble. She swallowed hard. "What do you want?" Her voice was steady, but he caught the slight tremor beneath it. He tilted his head, considering her question. Then, slowly, he smiled. "You'll find out soon enough." A shiver ran down her spine, because deep down she already knew this wasn't just about the past. This was just the beginning. She had spent years mastering the art of power, pulling strings, shaping narratives, making people dance to her tune. But tonight, as she sat across from him, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Fear, because this time she wasn't the one pulling the strings. The way he watched her, calm, unreadable, almost amused, sent a chill through her. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't angry, he was enjoying this. She gripped the paper tighter, her mind racing. There had to be a way out, a way to regain control. She had always found a way before, but as he leaned in, voice low and deliberate, his next words made her blood run cold. "Careful," he murmured. "You're not the one making the rules anymore." And for the first time in her life, she had no idea what would happen next. Phones buzzed. News anchors spoke in urgent tones. Social media exploded with speculation. His name, one they had buried, erased, forgotten, was now impossible to ignore. But it wasn't just his return that sent shockwaves through the city. It was how he had returned. In just one night, he had flipped the board, a company takeover that no one saw coming. A high-profile resignation that left people whispering. A leaked document that sent an empire crumbling from the inside. And at the center of it all, him. She gripped her phone, scrolling through headline after headline, her stomach twisting with each new revelation. He had played his first move, and it was devastating. But the final blow? It hadn't landed yet, because at the very bottom of the article, in bold, unmistakable letters, was a single line that sent chills down her spine. "Press conference, tonight. He has something to say." And she knew whatever was coming next would change everything.